What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you a look at Sea of Stars, a retro-inspired JRPG that released back on August 28th. I'd been meaning to get around to taking a look at it for a little while, as I do personally enjoy a pixel RPG every now and again. But with this game being sandwiched between Baldur's Gate 3, Starfield, Armored Core 6, I had a few other things to do first. So naturally, that makes me a bit late with this one. In any event, Sea of Stars is an interesting game because like many more modern, retro-inspired JRPGs, if you will, such as Chained Echoes recently, for instance, this game tries to implement a few different mechanics that make it a little more modern and mix up the formula a little bit. But to kick it off, let's talk about the setup here. Sea of Stars puts us in the role of two main characters, known as Zale and Valerie. These two just so happen to be children of the solstice, which basically means they can control magic from the sun and the moon. And after some training, they are formally named Solstice Warriors, whose job it is to fend off monstrous creatures left behind from some evil alchemist from the past, known as the Fleshmancer, which is a little on the nose, but we take on the role of these characters, and eventually 4 other party members from what I understand, in an effort to do just that. Now, that's about as far as I am into the story at the moment, but given that this is a JRPG, I'm sure it will end with us fighting God. The story setup so far has been pretty interesting. It's actually sort of framed as someone reading you a story that can potentially go one of a few ways, though it's all very cryptic at the moment. What is a bit more interesting, though, to me, is the turn-based combat. This is probably where the game varies the most from its, say, inspirations. A round of combat basically ends once everyone has gone, and while there is a sort of initiative order to when the enemies go, you can use your characters on your turn whenever you want. That is to say, you can pick and choose which one goes first. And then that little counter next to the enemies, upon reaching 0, marks their turn in the turn order. So there's a little bit of tactical element to it and attacking the appropriate enemies before they get their turn, etc. Now, to make this a little more interesting, when those enemies cast magic, you have the potential to stop them from doing so if you can hit them with the appropriate combination of damage types, such as blunt, slashing, a particular magic damage source, etc. And if you manage to do it, they will just not be able to cast anymore, or at least the spell will fail, so to speak, which can prevent you from taking damage, or at least more damage than you might otherwise. Now, beyond that, it's pretty much your standard attack and skill system. There's also a combo system. As you deal damage in combat, you'll build combo points, which will allow you to perform some especially useful moves with your 2 main characters, such as healing everyone or just dealing really great damage. However, to make that a little more actively involved, they've added a slight timing system to it where if you tap a button on the exact moment you hit something or the moment they hit you, you can either deal more damage or do more attacks, or reduce incoming damage by blocking appropriately. You can do that much better in combat, and that's hardly new per se, but it is a pretty big mechanic here. Now, when it comes to combat and the difficulty, one of the more interesting mechanics of this game is the relic system. Rather than have a sort of difficulty mode, they have relics. Relics are things you can essentially toggle on and off that then provide passive effects that can either make the game easier or more difficult, such as auto-healing you in between battles, which doesn't normally happen unless you have this turned on, or another one that I've found that makes the visual cue for tapping the extra attack or reducing incoming damage more distinct that'll allow you to successfully do it more often. It's also my understanding there are others that will make the game potentially more interesting or simply show you where the things you've missed are later in the title. So it's an interesting way of handling difficulty that is inherently somewhat modular, which is pretty cool to see. Now, beyond those major things, there's a few smaller details I wanted to mention. For starters, I really enjoy the way traversal works in this game. It's pretty much your standard location versus world map setup that we see in these kinds of games all the time. However, when you are in a location, you tend to have a lot of freedom of movement. You're able to jump around, you're able to jump up. So there's a fair amount of verticality involved in the way you can move around the map, which is nice in a game like this. And in doing so, you can even track down some resources that will feed into the cooking system, as most of your health items appear to come from cooking things, or, buying them, of course, but it's also possible to find recipes and make them and then use those as your healing items. The obligatory JRPG fishing minigame also has an appearance, and we can get materials for cooking from that as well. But even outside of stuff like that, there's also things like the level up system, allowing you to somewhat customize the stat increases you're going to get by picking which one gets a bonus on top of the base level stat increases. And that's to say nothing of the more traditional RPG things that I know are here, which are the extra bosses, the secrets, the usual stuff in a game like this. And all in all, I would say that combines to make a package that is seemingly at the beginning here pretty fun. Now, before I talk about the things I am enjoying the most here, I do want to mention the few things that give me pause and that I would be keeping an eye on for a full review, which is that the progression systems seem pretty limited. There's an equipment system, of course, but in the first few hours of the game, everything has been just a straight upgrade, so no point in holding on to other things for different situations. A lot of more basic functions also seem to be relegated to items as well, such as being able to see the health of monsters coming down to an item you can find early in the game. So a few things that I would just keep an eye on to see how well they play out over the course of the entire title, but probably the one that gives me the most pause is that I have heard the combat system doesn't really evolve past what I'm experiencing now. And while I've just gotten to a point in the story where they add a shift boost that allows you to turn your melee attacks into magic attacks, I am kind of curious if they do anything particularly interesting here. Now, presumably, bosses, of course, will have mechanics centered around what they've set up here that could potentially make them pretty engaging, but even here in just the first few hours, I mostly find myself doing the same few things in combat because they're the most effective things to do, and given what I've already heard about the game, I'm curious to see what, if anything, combat does from here to try to mix it up, or if it is literally just boss mechanics. To wrap the video up with what I enjoyed the most, however, I'm a big fan of the visuals and the art style. I really do enjoy more modern takes on pixel art these days, and seeing games do that successfully always tends to land with me, I admit, but I really do think this game looks great. Which kind of bleeds into the other thing I've been enjoying, which has simply been moving around the environments. There's a surprising amount of verticality to it. You're able to jump up and move around the ledges, perform some basic platforming to solve puzzles even. And that certainly wasn't the kind of thing I was going into this game expecting, so the fact that it's here has been surprisingly charming. All in all, though, I would say I'm enjoying its opening hours, so the game's initial reception doesn't really strike me as too odd or anything, but while I do plan on reviewing this one, don't expect that review anytime soon, as I am actively working on several other projects at the moment, so most of my playtime for this game is likely going to be on Steam Deck when I'm doing other things anyway. So, that said, by all means, let me know what you've thought about this game down below if you've played it, or just from what you've seen in this video, of course, but in any event, I certainly hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.